Covers are important for comic books for a lot of obvious reasons. It's the first basic selling point that's going to hook you if you're going to be interested in buying an issue or not. In this episode, I'm going to look at a couple interesting formats that were used by some publishers from the 1950s to the 1970s. One is called gray tone or wash tone covers. The first gray tone covers were initially done by Jerry Grandenetti, and the first issue is considered to be All-American Men of War number 35. And if you look at this cover, it certainly has a different look and feel to issues surrounding it. Gray tone covers were used primarily by DC in the 1950s all the way through to the 1970s to some pretty dramatic effects. This kind of gray tone, wash tone kind of format was primarily used in a lot of their war titles. But some of the artists also use this kind of special formatting for different genres, like for horror, as well as the occasional superhero comic book. Okay, let's take a look at some of these gray tone covers that I've managed to pick up over the years. This is a copy of Detective number 239. Now, what's special about this is the only full gray tone cover that I'm aware of a Batman cover. And you can see that the backgrounds do have this kind of interesting kind of pastel washed out color. Now there are other Batman books that use what I would call like this partial gray tone effect, and I'll show an example coming up. This is an early one from the late 50s. The cover is done by a well-known DC artist, Sheldon, and the coloring is actually done by Jack Adler. And Jack Adler is one of the DC colorist artists that would do a lot of these color washes for these books. So Detective number 239, the only Batman cover that has a full gray tone cover. So if you look at these gray tone covers, there's a quality to them that make them look like they're painted. But they're actually not painted. It's just the process that they go through that gives them this effect. If you're a gray tone collector, this is probably one of the tougher books to locate in any kind of grade. And this is The Three Mousketeers number 6. The cover is done by Sheldon Mayer. And Sheldon is probably better known for his work on Rudolph and Sugar and Spike. A big fan of his work. Especially his Sugar and Spike stuff. This is the only gray tone kind of funny animal book that I have, and I don't think there are very many others in the DC library at this time. But a tough book in any grade, actually. The Three Mousketeers, number 6. One of the grand masters of gray tone covers, Jerry Grandenetti, and this is a copy of GI Combat number 79. This is probably the best example that I have of his. GI Combat, starting from about issue 74, had this just spectacular run of gray tone covers that lasted about 30 issues, and they're often referenced as the Purdy 30. And really, if you like war books, if you like this kind of gray tone style, I think you owe it to yourself to look out for one of these books to add to your collection, because they truly are special. And I do like the earlier ones that don't have any other extra text. The artwork, the cover, does all the talking by itself. I call these kind of like silent covers. There are no word balloons and no kind of like titles or extra text on the cover, but an outstanding, beautiful cover by Jerry Grandenetti. GI Combat number 79. So what is a gray tone or wash tone cover? Well, it's a special process that makes the cover almost appear to be like a painted cover. So normally you have kind of like your pencils, your inks, and then you have your colors applied to it through the printing process. And the effect is fairly flat. But in a gray tone cover, the effects used kind of give this an almost kind of like pastel kind of layered effect that essentially makes the cover look like it's a painted cover. While this format was used as early as the 1940s, DC really started to kind of push and experiment with this format in the 1950s. Let's kind of peel the different layers of this process and take a look at this cover of House of Secrets number 97 that was done by Jack Sparling. A comic book artist always starts with penciling, and this is just kind of standard with all artists. The next process is inking, but for these kind of gray tone covers, instead of the standard kind of hard lines, black and white inking that's done, what's done is the inker or even the penciler, the artist himself or herself, will do an ink wash. And what these ink washes are using a brush and creating these different gradients or levels of gray. Sometimes they would also use graphite or charcoal, which also gives it a bit of a texture. And the next step is probably the most intriguing part of the process, and that's where a halftone photostat of the art is made. And from what I understand or what I can tell, it's basically a black and white photocopy of the artwork is made, but this kind of halftone, almost kind of layered gradient effect is added to this kind of photocopy. What this does is it kind of creates this almost kind of canvassing effect of the artwork. Afterwards, like the logo is added as well as, the price, the publisher, all this other information, and then the color wash is added through the printing process. Looking at some of these covers, you can see that this halftone wash tone process creates a dramatically different effect on the cover itself compared to other comic books, other issues surrounding it. I mentioned Jerry Grandenetti was one of the artists who used this process, but there are several other notable DC artists who also use this gray tone wash tone process. This is House of Secrets number 88, and it's done by Neal Adams. Neal Adams had a lot of really good gray tone wash tone covers, and I really do like his horror stuff. There's kind of like a gothic horror element to it, similar to the Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love that I showed you earlier, but the wash effect on this one is, I think, particularly good. It actually really feels like it's a painting. Now, it looks like he certainly did this with a lot of brush. These kind of like gray tone wash tone covers are perfect for this genre, and very popular with collectors. Look out for these and try to add them while you still can. They're not always easy to find in nice shape, and they're certainly getting a lot pricier. Neal Adams also did a lot of covers for Westerns, and this is All-Star Western number 5. Now, this title is probably better known for the later issues that have the first appearance of Jonah Hex, but this is honestly one of my favorite covers of all time. Certainly my favorite Western cover. And it has that gray tone effect used. Yeah, it's just a spectacular action Western shot. Kind of the hang 'em high, or if you're familiar with, the good, the bad, and the ugly, where basically the rope is shot by Clint Eastwood. This reminds me a lot of that. But a wonderful cover, a wonderful example of a gray tone wash tone cover. This is All-Star Western number 5. So I showed a copy of Detective 239 earlier. This issue really needs no introduction. It's Batman 232. If you are a comic book collector, a Batman collector, you are well aware of this issue. It's also the first appearance of Ra's al Ghul, and this is a combination gray tone wash tone cover. The background is wash tone and the foreground is done in your regular pencils and inks. And what it does is it gives this almost kind of a 3D effect where you have Batman and Robin in the forefront and Ra's al Ghul in the back. And it certainly looks like this is almost kind of like a pencil crayon effect that was first done before they did that wash tone process. One of the best Batman covers in my opinion, Batman 232. After seeing a few of these, you can start to become better at recognizing what are gray tone covers and which ones are not. This is a copy of Tomahawk, number 65. With other gray tone covers for these lesser known titles, they're not always remarked in the Overstreet price guide. So I was kind of surprised when I came across this copy and I looked up in the Overstreet, and it's actually not noted as a gray tone cover. To be fair, Tomahawk is, one of DC's lesser collected, less popular titles, even though later in the 1960s there is some collector interest in those books because they have these outstanding covers by Neal Adams. But an interesting kind of effect with the gray tone, you have this kind of strong yellow The Golden Arrow of Doom. The cover artwork is done by Bob Brown, as well the color wash is done by Jack Adler. I would say a tougher gray tone cover to locate if you are doing your gray tone checklist, Tomahawk number 65. If there's another title beyond GI Combat that would be defined by their gray tone covers, it would have to be Sea Devils. Sea Devils was popular enough from its tryout in Showcase to get its own title, and the earlier issues have these outstanding covers done by Russ Heath, as well the coloring washes done by Jack Adler again. Honestly, they are some of the better gray tone covers out there, especially the Russ Heath ones. This is the only Sea Devils gray tone cover that I own. The artwork is done by Howard Purcell, and again, the coloring washes done by Jack Adler. The gray tone effect or wash tone effect is actually just perfect for Sea Devils because a lot of their adventures take place underwater. So, the painted effect really adds to kind of the atmosphere, the environment for Sea Devils. But for sure, if you like gray tone covers, you should grab one of the Sea Devils to add to your collection. This is one of the only gray tone covers done by Joe Kubert, and it's not a full gray tone cover. As you'll notice, really, the gray tone effect is in the background. And for all titles, it's kind of interesting to note that this is a Superman book, and this is a copy of Superman number 216. It appears that the background character, the gray tone effect, was created more with either charcoal or graphite, and there is a nice kind of heavy texture element to it. And in the foreground, you have Superman, and that's just your standard pencils and inking. But one of the few, if only, gray tone covers for Superman, as far as I'm aware, but it's an interesting one. It has a war element to it, which is right up Joe Kubert's alley. The Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love lasted only 4 issues, but all 4 issues have amazing covers. And this is issue number 4, done by Nick Cardy. Now, these are really tough to locate in nice shape, and if you want to get them in nice shape, you're probably going to have to pay a pretty penny these days. But Nick Cardy, who has done so many amazing covers in the horror realm of DC, this is kind of your gothic romance horror combination, but this is one of I think his better covers. Yeah, it's a gray tone wash tone cover, and it's The Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love. I'm just going to give you a few examples of painted covers. I was hoping to do a little more discussion about this, but after going through my collection, I realized I don't have a nice variety or really, very good examples of painted covers. I do have a few, and this is one, and this is Boris Karloff Thriller. This is one of the few covers done by Michael Powers, and he would get more popularity through his covers for science fiction novels, and I believe a few magazines as well too. But he did a handful of covers for comic books, and Boris Karloff Thriller number 2 is one of them. The other 2 are the first 2 issues of Dr. Solar, number 1 and number 2, and those are also really beautiful painted covers, especially number 2, and certainly kind of tougher to find in high grade. There's just something about the weight of his work, the lines, the edges. There's a saying, something along the lines that you see the value of something when you see it. The first time when I saw this, maybe in my younger years, I didn't really appreciate it as much, but now I feel like I appreciate this kind of style of work more. And certainly his Doc Solar issues number 1 and 2, I wish I had nice copies of that, but I don't. But I'm still happy to have this issue of Boris Karloff Thriller number 2 in my collection. So one of the comic books that I have in the background when I'm speaking is a copy of Lassie with a painted cover. It's something about these kind of old Dell painted covers that I just find just charming, just beautiful. This cover is done by Morris Golub. I hope I'm pronouncing that name properly, and this was published in around 1956 or 1957. So Morris did a lot of covers for Dell at that time, a lot of animal covers. But You know, just something about the quality of the artwork of these painted covers that are just really great. And they're perfect for a title like Lassie. This is a copy of Tono and Kono, the Jungle Twins, #1. And this is a painted cover done by George Wilson, who was probably the most prolific painted cover artist for Western publishing. He did countless, and I mean hundreds, of painted covers for Western publishing, Gold Key, Ordell in the 60s and 70s. And honestly, the sheer number of painted covers, I don't know how he had enough time to do all these painted covers. Now, certainly the quality of the painted, covers vary from title to title. I think his Star Trek ones are kind of interesting, as well as his Ripley's Believe It or Not. But my hat's off to Mr. George Wilson for producing at a rate that would even make Jack Kirby proud in terms of the number of painted covers he produced during his period working with comic books. So why didn't they do more gray tone or painted covers? Well, I think it just boils down to economics. Painted covers or gray tone covers, like this process, they just take longer and they end up being more costly. Now, it's not to say that there haven't been, significant artists, even more recently, who have not done painted covers. You just look at what Alex Ross has done, and he's done some incredibly amazing painted covers. And he still does a lot of these great things. But certainly it feels like the process back then for making these painted covers or these gray tone covers, took some time. It's not to say that there weren't artists who were able to do these quickly. And, you look at George Wilson, and I just can't believe the number of painted covers he was able to generate in such a short period of time. As well, if you look at a lot of magazines at that time, comic book magazines, painted covers certainly seemed to dominate that format. But I think because the publishing of those magazines were a little more irregular, or they allowed a little more time, maybe publishers at that time felt, it was worth the waiting the extra amount of time to have these painted covers ready for these issues. Certainly, like Warren Publishing, like Creepy, Eerie, Vampirella had some amazing painted covers done by, really famous artists. Everybody from Frank Frazetta to Gray Morrow to, Neal Adams. I think the magazine format was ideal for these kind of painted covers just because they're larger. So there you have it. A look into some gray tone and painted covers in my comic book collection. I'm sure there are a lot of other quality gray tone and painted covers that I missed or I didn't talk about. Let me know in the comments below about some other ones that you think are notable, worth mentioning. If you enjoyed this video, I have a few other videos you can check out over here. And until next time, read and enjoy your comic books.